Hujambo, and welcome to our very first episode of Historia, Who Are The Swahili? I'm your host, Swahili Girl. The Swahili identity is complex to understand as it covers an expansive territory with a homogeneous yet diverse community, and whose local history was in the form of oral tradition, which tends to be erased by written tradition. The Swahili are a group of people originating from East Africa, a predominantly Muslim Bantu community known to be fishermen, farmers, traders, craftspeople, and seafarers. The identity is held together by two main fabrics, language and culture, with Islamic traditions being interwoven into the culture. Generally, there are two types of Swahilis: Swahilis by birth and Swahilis by culture, meaning Swahilis through assimilation and integration. Shihabuddin Chiragdin noted that oral traditions state the Swahilis came from people called the Wangozi, who migrated from a legendary place known as Shungwaya, north of River Tana. They began settling around the Lamu area in Kenya and gradually moved southwards along the coasts and islands of 5 countries: Kenya, Somalia, Tanzania, Mozambique, and Comoros. They formed numerous autonomous city-states from this migration, resulting in a network of trade ports. Swahili as a language spread inwards, serving as a lingua franca for the rest of Eastern Africa. The autonomous city-states formed shared the culture and the language, but did not identify collectively as Swahilis. They spoke a similar language, but had different dialects of it. People then mainly identified themselves by their geographical locations. People from Pate were called Wapate, Lamu wa Amu, Pemba wa Pemba. The collective Swahili identity seems to have come later on as a byproduct of the Arab and British rule, sometime in the 19th century. It can be noted that the greater the influence of the Arab or colonial governance, the more prevalent the collective Swahili identity became. Case in point, Mombasa, what was then known as Mvita. Mombasa had some of the first and earliest groups to band under this identity. These were the Wachangamwe, Wakilindini, and Watangana, known as the Thalatha Taifa. The Swahili identity then expanded to include 9 more communities in Mvita, the Tisa Taif, which had Wamvita, Wakilifi, Wamtwapa, Wapate, Washaka, Wagunya, Wakatwa, Wafaza, and Wajomvu. In Kenya, communities that are not based in Mombasa and are not of the 3 core tribes rarely refer to themselves as Swahili. They identify with their original community names, such as Wapate, Washela, Wabajuni, Waamu. In one instance, Bajuni political leaders formally lobbied at the Lancaster Conference to be listed as a separate ethnic group and not as Swahilis. The Thalatha Taifa and Tisa Taifa, together forming the Thenashara, were known as the Swahilis by birth. And then we had the phenomenon of Swahilis by assimilation. If one could embrace the 2 cores of being Swahili, language and culture, then almost anyone could be Swahili by assimilation, especially if they were Muslim and lived amongst the community. According to Alamin M. Mazrui and Ibrahim Nur Sharif, many Africans and non-Africans who had settled in the East African coast became acculturated into the Swahili identity without losing their otherness in the process. For example, Arabs, Baluchis, and Indians were known by their individual communities, but still form a part of the greater Swahili culture. They can be known as Swahilis, but still link back to their original cultures, a dual citizenship of some sort. The other type of assimilated Swahilis that we have are what Mazrui M. Mazrui called Swahilis by detribalization. These are the people who did not hold on to their otherness, like the Baluchis and the Indians and the Arabs. It's predominantly seen amongst people who converted to Islam and were ostracized from their communities. The estranged ended up associating with the Swahili community and becoming part of it. This was evident in urban Swahili settlements such as Majengo and Pumwani in Nairobi, where many Muslims, regardless of their tribe, began referring to themselves as Swahili. In Tanzania, Swahiliness by detribalization was a state project. Julius Nyerere's strive for socialism turned Swahili culture into public property. Many Tanzanians ended up relinquishing their tribes to fall under this bigger category. An even earlier form of Swahilis by assimilation was witnessed in Zanzibar in the 19th century when slave trade was abolished. Former slaves redefined themselves as Swahilis because freeborns at that time were Swahilis. So the term Swahili became a euphemism for ex-slave. There is a confusion in the Swahili identity, which was peddled by foreigners such as the Christian missionaries, the colonial government, and modern scholars, and also by Kenya's post-colonial government. This was done through policies, legislation, and misinformed research and syllabi. Until the 20th century, most of what was documented by foreigners did not acknowledge the Swahili as a primarily African community. Early scholars like Edward Steer, Jan Nappert, and even the Encyclopedia Britannica of 1911 insisted that Swahilis were half-castes of African slaves and Arab traders. Early European settlers and missionaries saw Islam as a threat to their conquests. The missionaries feared its spread, and the colonizers feared the unity and resistance it had brought about in other parts of the world. Islam to them was Arab, and therefore since Swahilis practiced Islam, they lumped them together with the Arabs. When they stopped seeing Islam as a threat, they used the divide and rule tactic. They had separated the Swahilis from other Africans by calling them Arab, and later on they disqualified them from being Arabs. All this led to further confusion of the Swahili identity. According to Mazrui and Sharif, the Arabization of the Swahili has resulted in the Swahili becoming people dispossessed of their identity, history, and economic and political rights. Even in explaining the root of the word Swahili, the Arab origin has been favored more than the African one. Many have stated Swahili comes from the word Sahil, meaning coast in Arabic. And yet the possibility of the word having an African origin is rarely heard of. So most Swahilis lived on islands, and the theory is that they may have been referring to themselves as Wa Siwahili, the people of this island. The word Swahili could have come from the phrase Siwahili, meaning this island. Newer generations of people who would qualify to be Swahilis by birth are grasping onto foreign links and letting go of their African roots. And those who can be Swahili by assimilation have distanced themselves from the community. This is something that can be traced back to a colonial law in Kenya that guaranteed those who are non-natives would receive better treatment and pay less taxes than Swahilis and other natives. We tend to fight to hold on to the better passport, right? Frederick Johnson, the man who wrote the first standard Swahili English dictionary, said, Swahili is an elastic term, and as noted, it can stretch out to include people connected to it both by blood and by culture. Just like nationality, one can be a citizen by birth or by naturalization. The identity of the Swahili community is continuously being explored, and a lot more is yet to be uncovered. James Allen said, there can be few historic people whose identity is as elusive as that of the Swahilis, and I could not agree more. That's all for now from Historia, Who Are the Swahili? We plan on digging deeper into the history and culture of the East African coast, and we hope you'll join us on this journey. Thank you for all those who made this possible, and feel free to comment, clarify, or ask questions in the comment section below. We're all in this learning and unlearning process together. Bye.